They lit her pyre at moonrise, and Mirella watched her own funeral from the rafters of the chapel, breath shallow against a beam of black pine, her hands wound in the rope she had used to climb. The lower pack had loved her enough to mourn. That was the part that hurt. Old Branwen wept openly into her shawl. The miller's wife pressed her 2 children's faces to her skirt so they would not see the empty shroud. Someone had laid winter asters across the wood, the only thing still blooming in the cold months, and Mirella counted them and made herself feel nothing. The shroud was empty because there was no body to burn. There was a girl, 20 years old, of marriageable age by pack law, who had been lined up for the mating auction at sunrise and had decided that she would rather drown in the river Iron than be sold across the auction block to a stranger's bed. The river had taken her cloak. The river had taken her boots. The river had taken her name. The girl in the rafters was someone else now. Someone with no name and no auction price. Then the great chapel doors split open, and the wind came in, and behind the wind came the king. Mirella's grip on the rope went white. He should not have come. The alpha king of the Ironcrown pack did not attend the funerals of nameless lower pack girls. He sent a beater with a sealed letter and a coin pressed into the family's hand. He did not, ever, walk in person across a frozen courtyard to stand beside an empty shroud. But Soren of Ironcrown stood there now, the firelight catching the iron in his hair, and his eyes. Gods, his eyes were not the eyes of a man come to mourn. They were the eyes of a man come to verify. He walked the length of the aisle slowly, the pack falling silent and dropping their gazes, and he stopped 1 pace short of the empty shroud. His right hand, the hand he never took out of his glove in public, came up. He pulled the glove free with his teeth. Mirella almost made a sound. The mark on his palm was burning. She could see it from the rafters, a black lattice of script, raised and angry, glowing faintly against his skin. It was the bone ledger's mark. Every wolf in the kingdom knew it on sight, and every wolf in the kingdom was terrified of what it could read. He laid his marked palm on the empty shroud. For a long moment nothing happened. Old Branwen made a small, wounded sound. The fire in the brazier guttered, recovered, guttered again. Then the mark on his palm dimmed. He withdrew his hand. He pulled the glove back over the script with deliberate slowness. He did not address the pack. He turned, and his cloak swept the floor, and he walked out the way he had come. But at the threshold he paused. He turned his head, just enough that the firelight caught one side of his face, and he spoke a single sentence to the captain of his guard, low and clear and meant to carry. "She is not in there." Mirella's heart stopped. She did not breathe again until he was gone, the doors shut, the wind cut off, the chapel returned to its hush of weeping. She held the rafter and counted her own pulse and understood, with a cold clarity that drove deeper than the river had, that the king of the Ironcrown pack had attended her funeral, because he already knew the truth. Which meant the question was not whether she would survive the auction. The question was what he intended to do about it. She climbed down at the 3rd hour of the night, when the chapel had emptied and the keepers had gone to their beds. The empty shroud lay where it had been laid, and Mirella laid her hand on the wood where his marked palm had rested. The shroud was warm. She had spent her entire life being looked through. The lower pack tolerated her because the healer needed an apprentice. When the mating auction list had come down, every unbonded woman of suitable age, marked for the block, her name had been on it as a formality, a number to round out the bidding. She was not supposed to fetch a price. She was supposed to be claimed by some second son for a sack of grain and disappear into a marriage bed she had not chosen. She had walked into the river instead. And the most powerful wolf alive had attended her empty funeral and laid his cursed hand on her empty shroud and said, in front of his guard, that she was not in there.
He had not come to drag her back. If he had, he would have brought iron. He had not come to expose her. If he had, he would have spoken her name. He had come to confirm something for himself, and then he had walked away. A man does not ride through a winter night to confirm a death and then walk away, unless the death was the inconvenient outcome, unless he had wanted very much for her to still be alive.
Somewhere on the other side of the courtyard, a wolf howled, long, broken, a voice she had never heard in the lower packlands before. It was the voice of a wolf who had ridden a long way and found nothing where something should have been. She pulled her hood up. She left the chapel through the side door. She did not run. She had 3 days, she calculated, before someone in the lower pack noticed that the new healer's apprentice had Mirella's hands. She made it to the 2nd day. She was grinding feverfew in the back of the herb shed when the door opened too quietly. She knew the sound of a man who did not want to be heard. She had grown up under a man like that. "Healer's apprentice," he said, in the easy, almost friendly voice of a man who had killed for his living long enough that the killing had become a courtesy. "I'm looking for a girl who fell in the river." Mirella kept grinding. "Many girls have fallen in the river, sir." This one was on the auction list. Her funeral was last night. The king attended. She did not stop grinding. Her hand around the pestle was very steady. "I am sorry for her family's loss," she said. A hand closed on her wrist. Not hard, not yet, but deliberate. The grip of a man establishing what he could do without yet doing it. She did not flinch. "Look at me, apprentice." She looked. He was a tall, lean man with the kind of face that women had once found handsome before he had used it too often as a weapon. There was an embroidered ash tree on his collar, the sigil of Lady Vesna of the Ash Reach. Mirella knew that sigil. Every woman on the auction list knew that sigil. Lady Vesna had purchased the auction rights from the Crown 3 years running. Her enforcer was holding Mirella's wrist, and his eyes had no surprise in them at all. "My lady is short 1 auction lot," he said. "She would prefer to recover it before the Crown discovers the loss." "The Crown was at the funeral, sir." "The Crown saw what we wanted him to see." That was the wrong thing for him to say. Mirella understood, with the cold clarity she had earned through 20 years of being underestimated, that the man holding her wrist did not know that Soren of Ironcrown had pressed his marked palm to her empty shroud. He thought the king had been deceived. She let her face go slack. She let the pestle fall from her free hand and clatter on the table the way a frightened apprentice would. His grip loosened, not much, but enough, and that was when she drove her knee up into the soft place under his ribs and brought the iron mortar around in a short, hard arc and caught him across the jaw. He went down on 1 knee. He did not go down further. He was a wolf, and a wolf's bones did not break the way a man's did. But he was on 1 knee, and she was at the door, and she was running. She ran through the herb garden and through the orchard and into the trees, and behind her she heard him roar, the roar of a wolf in partial shift, the kind that could only come from a creature past restraint. The pursuit ended in a clearing she had not chosen, with a horse standing very still in the snow and a man on its back whose hood was up and whose hand was already drawing back from the bow he had not needed to use. The arrow had taken her pursuer in the throat. He lay in the snow at her feet, twitching once and then not again. The man on the horse pushed his hood back. Mirella's breath left her. "Apprentice," said Soren of Ironcrown, in the voice she had heard speak her death sentence in a chapel the night before. "We should talk." He did not bind her wrists. He offered his hand from the saddle, and she stood in the snow, looking at it for a long moment. And then she chose to take it. That was important to her, later. He held the choice open. She was the one who closed it. The fortress of Ironcrown rose from the cliffs over the Iron River like something the cliffs had grown rather than built. Black stone, narrow windows, a great hall whose carved wolf throne was visible from the courtyard through doors no one ever closed. Mirella had seen it only once before, from a distance. He took her not to the great hall, but to a small chamber off the healer's wing. He set her in a chair by the fire. He poured her wine. He stood 3 paces away, never close, with his back to a window that looked out on the courtyard where the funeral fires had been lit for someone else. "I am going to ask you 3 questions," he said. "I would like you to answer them honestly." "And if I lie?" "The bone ledger's mark will tell me." He held up his right hand. The script there was darker than it had been in the chapel. "It reads truth from skin. It is why I do not shake hands." "Then we have a problem, my lord. You did not touch my skin." For the first time, something almost like a smile passed across his face. A wry, dangerous edge, gone before she was sure she had seen it. "I did not need to," he said. "Your name has been writing itself in the ledger for 3 weeks." He crossed the room to a small chest at the foot of the cot and unlocked it, and lifted out a heavy thing of black leather and bone clasps. He laid it on the table. He turned it so she could see. The bone ledger of Ironcrown. Every mate bond ever made or sworn in this kingdom for 3 centuries, written on the skin of an animal she did not want to know the species of. The Book of Truths. The book that burned its bearer if a bond was falsified. He turned to a page she had not seen but somehow recognized. It was halfway through. It was blank, except for a name. Mirella. Written in handwriting that was not the king's. Written, she understood with a slow, vertical drop in her chest, in her own. "I have not slept in 3 weeks," he said. "Every night the page fills a little more. The first night it was only the M. By the 3rd week the page had begun to bleed." "Bleed?" He turned the page. The next sheet was rust brown, the bone clasps stained where they touched it. "When the ledger writes a bond and the bond is rejected, it bleeds. When it writes a bond and the bond is real, it warms." He laid his palm flat on the page. The script on his hand pulsed once, slow and bright. "Yours is real. And I have been riding for 3 weeks trying to find a woman whose name keeps writing itself onto my hand." "That is the first question," she said quietly. "What was the second?" Something in him eased, a man who had expected to be fought and was being met instead. "Did you know that you were mine?" She closed her eyes. "No, my lord. I did not know. I would have stayed at the bottom of the river if I had known what staying alive would mean." "And the third question?" "Yes." "Will you tell me who put your name on the auction list?" She had not expected that one. She had thought he would ask whether she would consent. He had asked instead about the people who had tried to sell her, and she understood, with a slow, unfolding warmth she had no defense against, that this was a man who had already decided she was his, and was now hunting the men who had tried to take her elsewhere. "Lady Vesna of the Ashreach," she said. The script on his palm flared, then steadied. Confirmation. Of course, confirmation. She had told him the truth. Vesna. He spoke the name the way another man might lay down a sword. I had wondered. He turned away from her, toward the window. The wolf throne in the great hall was just visible through the open chamber door, and Mirella saw, for the first time, the thin layer of frost that lay over its iron arms even now, in firelit afternoon. A frost that the warmth of the hall could not seem to touch. "There is something else you should know," he said, without turning. "The ledger does not give. It takes. Every bond it writes costs the wolf who bears the mark." He held up his hand. The script was darker now, almost black. "It has been taking from me for 3 weeks. I have wondered, lately, if I am the only one paying." She did not know what he meant. She would. soon. The beater arrived at dusk with the day's reports, and he was the most beautiful man Mirella had ever seen. Silver-haired, courtly, his voice carrying the rough burr of the upper reaches. Halvar of the hollowed house, second to the king for 15 years, the most trusted wolf in the fortress, and the last living brother of the dead Luna, whose loss Soren had not yet spoken of in Mirella's presence. Halvar's eyes moved over Mirella once, sharp as a blade, and then his face softened into the kind of welcome she had no instinct for. "My lord, you have brought us a guest." "I have brought us the truth," Soren said. "Convene the council. Lady Vesna will be examined at the bone ledger by midnight." Halvar bowed. He did not look at Mirella again, but she felt the look he had not given her, and her healer's instincts, the instincts that had kept her alive in the lower pack for 10 years, set every hair on the back of her neck on end. She did not say anything to Soren, not yet. She had only the silence of a man who had not asked who she was when every other wolf in the room would have asked first. A man who already knew did not ask. Lady Vesna was brought to the great hall at the 11th hour, in chains she had not seen coming. Soren did not sit on the throne. He stood beside it. His marked hand was bare. Mirella watched from the upper gallery behind a carved screen Halvar himself had positioned for her, a place where she could see and hear without being seen. That was Halvar's first mistake. "Lady Vesna of the Ash Reach," Soren said, and the great hall fell silent. "You have purchased the auction rights for 3 years. The Crown permitted this because the Crown understood it as commerce. It is now my understanding that it has not been commerce." Vesna's chin came up. She was beautiful, in the cold, blade-edged way of a woman who had survived courts. She was also unafraid, which was the wrong reaction. "Place your hand on the ledger, my lady." "I would prefer not to. I did not ask for your preference." 2 guards moved, and Vesna's hand was placed on the open page, and the script on Soren's palm flared, and the hall heard, audibly, the sound of the ledger making a noise it should not have made, a low cracking like ice beneath a horse's hoof. "Whom did you sell the bonded daughters to?" Soren asked. I do not know what you—" "The Hollowed Council, my lady. I would like you to confirm the name." Vesna's eyes went wide. "How did you—" "Confirm the name." "The Hollowed Council," Vesna whispered. The ledger flared. The sound it made this time was worse, a kind of low keening, a book in pain. "For what purpose, my lady?" To keep the king's bonds suppressed. The council has been—" She stopped. Her face changed. She looked, suddenly, past Soren, past the throne, up into the gallery, up to the carved screen behind which Mirella was standing. Vesna's eyes locked onto Mirella's through the lattice, and her mouth opened. And what she said next was the sentence that broke the hall. "He is here, my lord. The Hollowed Council is here, in this room." Soren did not turn. He did not need to. Mirella watched Halvar's hand move toward his belt, slow, smooth, the motion of a man who had practiced, and she opened her mouth to scream a warning, and was already too late, because the assassin Halvar had stationed in the gallery behind her had already drawn his blade and was already moving toward her back. She turned. She had time to see his face. She had time to think she was about to die. And then an arrow took him through the chest at the base of his throat, and he went down in front of her. And below in the hall there was a roar and a blur of motion that resolved into Soren in partial shift, only the eyes and the hands and the voice, climbing the gallery steps 3 at a time with his blade drawn and his marked hand bleeding light. The arrow had come from the opposite gallery, from a hooded archer Mirella did not yet recognize. The archer pushed back her hood, and Mirella saw a girl, perhaps her own age, a face she had glimpsed once at the auction list reading, a girl who had been sold last year and never seen again. And the girl gave Mirella a single, hard nod and slipped back into the dark before the guards could turn. Soren reached the gallery. He pulled Mirella behind him. "I am all right," she said. "You are not. You are bleeding." She looked down. The assassin's blade had caught her across the forearm in his fall, a long, shallow cut she had not yet felt. Soren made a sound she did not have a word for. He pulled her arm to him. He held her arm at the wrist, only the wrist, and laid his marked palm over the cut, and the script on his hand went pure white. The cut closed, cleanly. There was no scar. There was, instead, when he lifted his hand away, a thin line of black script across her forearm, the same lattice that lived on his palm. The ledger had marked her. Below, in the hall, Lady Vesna was screaming a name. Halvar was nowhere to be seen. Soren looked down at the script on Mirella's arm. He looked at his own palm. The script there had faded. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh no." It would be a long time before she understood why. If you have made it this far, the algorithm tells me you are the kind of listener who does not flinch. Tap the like button and stay close. The Ironcrown is not finished with us yet. The fortress went into lockdown by the second hour after midnight. Halvar was not in his quarters. The hollowed council, Soren told her grimly, was not a list of names, but a faction. Old houses who had once ruled the territory before his line had taken it, who had been operating from inside the upper pack for 15 years, and who had been keeping his mate bond suppressed. "Suppressed how?" she asked. "By keeping me from knowing your name. By keeping every potential bond noisy and obscured. By making sure that when my wolf reached for the woman I was meant for, he reached instead through 50 other bondless women on an auction block and could not pick her out." Soren's voice was very controlled. "I have been ruling a kingdom for 15 years on a fraction of my own instincts." She held her marked forearm out. "And this?" "That," he said, "is the part I should have warned you about." She waited. The ledger does not write bonds for free. Every bond it confirms takes something from the wolf who bears the mark. He turned his right palm up. The script there was lighter, almost faded. "It eats lifespan. Every truth you tell me, every truth I tell you. Every confirmation of the bond between us, the ledger takes a measure. Days at first, then weeks, then more, when the bond is forbidden by the faction that wrote the geas." He paused. "I have known about the cost since I was a boy. We did not know, until tonight, that the ledger had been deliberately calibrated to take more from us when the bond it confirmed was one the hollowed council wished to prevent. Halvar's faction wrote that calibration into the geas itself. When we tell each other the truth, my lady, we are paying them with our lives." She heard the new title, My Lady, and did not have the strength to react to it. "How long?" she said. 3 weeks of writing have already taken something close to 3 years from me. Healing your arm with the ledger's authority, I would estimate it cost you a year, possibly more. She looked at the black script on her forearm. A year for a cut that would have closed on its own in a fortnight. "I will not do it again. I will not ask you for any more truths than the ledger has already taken. We can lie to each other, my lady. From this point forward, we can give it nothing." She looked up. "No," she said. His head came up. "You have ruled for 15 years on half your instincts. You will not rule another 15 on a wife who lies to you. We will give it everything. We will break it instead." She had not meant to say wife. He had not meant to hear it. The room was very quiet for a moment. "With what, my lady?" "The geas was written into the ledger's bones. Things that are written can be unwritten.
We will find the writing. We will burn it. We will burn the council with it. He looked at her for a long time. You have been in my fortress for less than a day, milady, and you are already planning to burn down a faction that has held this kingdom for 15 years. Yes, my lord. He laughed. It was a small sound, soft, surprised. The laugh of a man who had not laughed in a long time and had been startled into remembering how. The script on his palm flickered once with something that was not pain. He reached across the table. He laid his fingers a hand's breadth from hers on the wood, palm up. She laid her fingers near his, palm up. They did not touch. They sat like that, 3 paces apart at a small table, with their hands open on the wood between them, and Morella understood that this was the closest thing to a vow either of them was going to make, and that it would be enough. Outside, the wolf throne was rimed with frost the firelight could not reach. The next 2 days were a war fought in whispers. Halvar had vanished, but the hollowed council had not. Soren named them in the great hall, 6 houses, all old, all ranked, all positioned at the edges of the kingdom where the crown's grip was thinnest. He stripped each of their seats. The kingdom shook with the announcements, and beneath them ran a quieter current. Wolves of the lower pack, who had heard rumors of the auction's true purpose, beginning to whisper their own losses to the new healer's apprentice, who was now installed as the king's intended. By the second day, Morella had a list of 14 women from the lower pack who had been auctioned to council houses over 5 years and never returned. She brought the list to Soren, and she watched his jaws set. The signature twist deepened on the 3rd night. Morella woke to find the script on her forearm warmer than it had been, and she sat up and saw, by the light of the dying hearth, that the script was crawling. It was extending. It was writing more of itself, slowly, up the inside of her arm toward the elbow. By dawn, it had spelled out a full sentence in a language she did not read. She brought it to Soren in the council chamber, her sleeve rolled to the elbow. He read the line. He went very pale. "What does it say?" she asked. "It says, 'The bound wolf walks.'" He looks up at her. "Morella, the ledger is no longer just confirming our bond. It is naming his. Halvar's. It is telling us where he is. The truth it is writing now is that he has left the kingdom. He crossed the northern border into the Ash Reach to gather the rest of the council. To return." She looked at the script on her arm. The mechanic that had been a cost was also a sight. She had become the ledger. "Then we have until he gathers them," she said. "After that, he comes for us." "Yes, my lady." "Then we use the time." The next 3 days were the closest Morella had ever come to happiness, which terrified her, because every wolf she had ever known had taught her that happiness was the season before the hard frost. Soren did not court her in the way wolves courted. He did not bring her gifts. He stood 3 paces away from her in council chambers and asked her opinions and listened to her answers and used them. He walked the courtyard with her at dusk, talking of nothing and everything. The river, the lower pack, the woman she had been before she had walked into the water, the boy he had been before his Luna had died, and his oldest friend had begun the long, quiet work of breaking him from inside the walls. He told her about that, eventually, about the Luna who had not, as the kingdom believed, died in childbirth, but had been killed by a poison drawn from her own brother's hand. About the night he had taken Halvar in his arms and wept on his shoulder, not knowing. "I do not know how I did not see it," he said. They were standing on the cliff overlook, the wind sharp, the river breaking ice below them. "He grieved with me. He drank with me. He held my hand at her funeral, and I—" "You loved him," Morella said quietly. "Yes. That is why you did not see it. Love hides what it loves." He looked at her. The wind caught his cloak.
3 paces away. "You see," he said, "you saw him in the council chamber the moment he came in. How did you see?" She thought about 10 years in a lower pack, where being underestimated had been the only safety she had. "I've spent my whole life watching for the shape of the next blow," she said. "Eventually, you start to see who is holding it." He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm glad, my lady, that you have come to a place where you no longer need to watch." That was the moment she nearly walked into him. She did not. She held 3 paces. She held them so hard her hands ached. 2 nights later, the false wind came. A messenger arrived at the fortress at midnight from the northern border, wounded, exhausted, half-shifted in his exhaustion. He had ridden 3 days. His news? Halvar had been taken. The remnants of the council had turned on him. He was being held in the lower fortress at the river bend, awaiting the king's pleasure. Soren convened the council at the 2nd hour. He ordered a delegation to ride at first light. He came to Morella's chamber afterward and stood in her doorway, not entering, and told her, for the first time, that he believed they were near the end. She believed him. That was her mistake. The messenger was the lieutenant, a scout-blooded wolf named Rorik, who had been planted in the Northern Messenger Corps for 9 years, given a single task: deliver a false message the night before the council struck. The delegation rode at dawn. Soren rode with them. Morella woke at the 7th hour to find the fortress empty of its first rank, and the script on her arm reading a new sentence in a language she now half understood. "The bound wolf comes home." He was not in the lower fortress. He had never left. She ran for the great hall, because she knew, in the way she had known a man with a knife behind her in the gallery, where Halvar would be. She was right. Halvar was on the dais. The wolf throne stood empty. Soren's signet ring lay broken in 2 pieces on its iron arm, pulled from his finger in the night and snapped, the seal that held the king's authority to the kingdom's geas. Beside the throne stood 3 armed wolves of the hollowed council, and behind them, slumped against a pillar with his hands bound and his marked palm bleeding, was Soren. He had been taken in his bed. The delegation had ridden into a trap. The fortress had been opened from inside. Halvar turned when she entered. He did not look surprised. He looked, instead, almost gentle. The silver-haired courtier who had grieved with his king for 15 years. "My lady, please come closer." She did not. "You are bound to him through the ledger. The ledger takes a measure with every truth told between you, and we have, by my count, a year and 7 months of you left at the rate you have been bleeding it out. The cost was always going to land here. We did not make the cost. We only calibrated it." "Why?" she said. "Because his line was never meant to hold this throne. Because his bond to you would have ended us. We could not let it form. We let your name onto the auction list because we believed you would be sold to a council house and quietly drowned. We did not foresee the river. We did not foresee a king who would attend a funeral. We did not foresee that the apprentice who climbed out of a chapel rafter would be the woman whose name was already writing itself onto his hand." He drew a small, dark book from his robe. The match. The other half. Not the bone ledger of Ironcrown. Its mirror. The hollowed ledger. The geas's source. "If I burn his name from this book, the bond severs. He will live. You will live. You will both forget each other within a season. The kingdom will return to me, and to the council, and to the order it had before he and his father and his father's father broke it. No one need die." He held the book up. "Tell him to release the bond, my lady. He will, if you ask. Tell him, and walk out, and you live." She looked at Soren. Soren's eyes were on hers. He could not speak. There was a silver bit between his teeth, the kind used to muzzle wolves who were about to confess. But his eyes were on hers, and they were not asking her to leave. They were asking her, very clearly, to do what she had come to do. Take a breath, my friend. Let your shoulders down. The Ironcrown is one decision away from changing. If this story is gripping you, hit the like button before we go on. The next part is the part the council was trying to prevent. No, Mirella said. She walked toward the dais. Halvar's wolves moved, and Halvar raised a hand, and they stopped. I am not going to ask him to release me, and he is not going to release me. We have already paid your geas. We are going to break it instead. With what, my lady? You are unarmed. She held up her marked forearm. The script there was crawling, extending, and as Halvar's eyes followed it, the script wrote, in a language he read fluently, "The bound wolf is named, and the named wolf is bound." She had become the ledger. The ledger could write. It could also rewrite. She walked to the wolf throne. She laid her marked forearm on the iron arm where the frost had lain for 15 years untouched. The frost did not melt. It crawled. It crawled up her arm in a slow grey climb, and she felt it lock onto her bones, and the cold drove into her like a second blade. She did not pull her arm back. She closed her eyes. The script on her forearm flared white, then black, then white again, and she felt it begin to write. Not on her this time, but through her, onto the page of the hollowed ledger in Halvar's hand. His ledger began to bleed. Halvar made a sound she had never heard a man make. The frost climbed past her elbow, past her shoulder. She did not have a free hand to grip the throne. She gripped it anyway, with the marked hand, and the iron under her palm went black. Her vision narrowed. The cost of breaking this geas was being written on her, in her, through her, and she understood, distantly, calmly, with the same clarity she had brought to a chapel rafter and a herb-shed door, that she was paying the rest of the years the ledger had been measuring. All of them. The year and 7 months. And more. She heard Soren. She heard him through the bit, a rough animal sound that was her name. She kept her hand on the throne. The hollowed ledger in Halvar's hand burst into flame. It did not burn slowly. It went up like dry tinder doused in lamp oil, the script on its pages turning to ash and scattering, and Halvar held it for one long moment as the fire ate up his sleeve, and then he dropped it. And the wolves of the council on the dais drew their blades. And that was when the doors of the great hall split open, and the king's loyal warriors flooded in. Soren was on his feet. The bit had fallen from his mouth, when, Mirella did not know, and his marked hand was free, and the script there was no longer black. It was light. The ledger's geas was burning through his side of the bond too, and the cost of 15 years of suppression was being repaid in seconds. He moved across the dais in 2 strides. He did not partial shift. He did not draw a blade. He took Halvar by the throat with his bare hands, and he held him there, and he looked at him for a long time without speaking. And Halvar of the hollowed house, second to the king, brother of the dead Luna, wept. You held my hand at her funeral, Soren said. Halvar nodded against his grip. You will not hold mine. He did not kill him. He let him drop. He turned away. The warriors took Halvar in chains. Soren crossed the hall to Mirella. She was on her knees at the throne. The frost had reached her collarbone. She could not feel her hand. She was still gripping the iron, because she could not work out how to make her fingers let go. Soren knelt 3 paces away. He did not touch her. He held out his marked hand, the script there light and clean, fully restored, and waited. She lifted her marked arm from the throne. The frost was already retreating. The black on the iron was thinning. The geas had burned. The ledger was clean. She placed her hand in his. He held it, skin to skin. The script on his palm did not flare. It pulsed. Once, gently, and then it faded into nothing. The lattice gone. The curse gone. His hand again. "You are mine," he said quietly, only for her. "Yes." "And I am yours." "Yes." He leaned forward, 3 paces no longer, and he touched his forehead to hers. He held it there. The hall was full of warriors and witnesses and the wreckage of a coup, and what passed between them in that touch was something the ledger could not have written and the council could not have caused. He kissed her once. It was not the kiss of a man who had wanted her body. It was the kiss of a man who had walked into a chapel 3 weeks before to verify a death, and had walked out knowing that the only future he wanted was one in which she was alive in it. What broke open in him in that moment was the part that had been suppressed for 15 years. Not his wolf, not his crown, but the man underneath both. He pulled back. He pressed his forehead to hers again. He breathed. Then he stood, and he held out his hand to her, and he turned them both to face the hall. "My pack," he said. The hall fell silent. "This is Mirella of the lower pack. She has been written into the bone ledger of Ironcrown for 3 weeks. Tonight she has burned a 15-year geas with her own blood. She is your Luna. She is mine. Bend the knee, or leave the hall." The hall bent the knee. All of it. The warriors, the council members not yet in chains, the servants who had crept in from the corridors, even old Branwen, who had somehow climbed 3 flights of stairs in her shawl, dropped to one knee in the back of the hall and wept. The wolf throne behind them was no longer rimed in frost. The first warmth in 15 years was running over its iron arms in a slow, bright glaze, the way frost ran in spring when the ground remembered what it had been. 3 months later, the gardens of Ironcrown were blooming for the first time in 15 winters. Wildflowers had come up through cracks in the courtyard stones, winter asters, the same kind that had been laid across an empty shroud in a chapel 3 months before. Mirella walked among them in a cloak that was no longer borrowed, and the lower pack and the upper pack alike bowed to her as she passed. The hollowed council had been dismantled. 3 houses had surrendered, 2 had fled. 1 had been wiped from the kingdom's records, their seats given to lower pack families chosen by Mirella from her list of 14, the families of the women who had been auctioned and not returned. The Crown had repealed the mating auction by formal proclamation, and the chapel where Mirella's empty funeral had been held had been rededicated. Halvar was in the deepest cell of the fortress. He had asked, twice, to be killed. Soren had refused him both times. Vesna had been exiled to the southern coast with 1 servant, the rest of her holdings forfeit, her name struck from the registers. The bone ledger of Ironcrown had been retired. It sat in a sealed case in the great hall, no longer in use. Mate bonds in the kingdom were now witnessed by the pack, not written in skin. The geas was gone. There was nothing left to take. A letter arrived for Mirella on the morning of her formal coronation. It came from the man who had been the steward of the lower pack, the man who had put her name on the auction list as a number to round out the bidding. It was 3 pages long. It begged, it explained, it pleaded. It asked, in the last paragraph, whether she might consider, perhaps in her mercy, a position for him on her household staff. She read it once. She set it aside. She did not answer. That night, on the cliff overlook with Soren beside her, 3 paces no longer, a hand's breadth, the easy nearness of a wolf with his mate.
She watched the river break a second skin of ice and laughed at something he had said. He looked down at her in the firelight. "What?" she said. "You laughed." "I do that, my lord." "Not often enough." "I will, now." The wolf throne behind them in the great hall stood warm and unfrosted, and the bone ledger of Ironcrown lay sealed in its case, and somewhere in the darkness below the fortress, Halvar of the Hollowed House, who had held a king's hand at his Luna's funeral and then spent 15 years holding the cost, slept on a stone floor in a cell that had once been used for wolves who could not be trusted with the truth. The kingdom Mirella had walked into the river to escape no longer existed. The kingdom she had walked out of the river to claim was warm. If you have made it here with me to the end, thank you. You are the reason this channel exists. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And which moment of this story made you forget to breathe? Subscribe if you want more dark fantasy nights like this one, and check out Moon and Iron for her side of the story. I will see you at the next fire.